3D printing has been lauded as the saviour of the miniature painting hobby. Everybody, for a long while it seemed, was going absolutely crazy over the advances in technology. Well, thanks to the incredible generosity of my community, I received a 3D printer for my birthday, so I'm finally in a position to be able to weigh in on this and give my thoughts on how I feel about 3D printing. Now, the first thing I will say is that setting up the 3D printer that I got at least, which was the Elegoo Mars 2 Pro, was, to be honest, very easy and pretty intuitive. The instructions, whilst not in the best English, and that may be a problem for some people, were certainly direct enough and illustrated well enough with pictures that it didn't take much effort to get the thing set up. The quick run through of that, basically you just have to unpack everything, install the build plate, and then calibrate the build plate. That's about it, and then from there you fill it up and you go. And I was able to get my first print run in probably about 20 minutes after it arrived. However, something you are going to have to learn to deal with pretty early on are failed prints and mistakes in cleanup. Depending on how gung-ho you are, in my case, spoiler alert, very, you're gonna make mistakes.
Fucking yeet!
There's gonna be issues. You may find that you have failed prints for a number of different reasons. Curing times are a big one, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But also mistakes in cleanup were a big problem for me. I didn't have any experience in the cleanup process prior to doing this, and so did a couple of things in the wrong order, and that cost me a couple of miniatures, or at least cost me a bit of quality on a couple of miniatures. They were pretty salvageable still. It was just, a bit of an arseache, and that's something you're going to have to learn, research, do a bit of trial and error, whatever is your preferred way of learning things, and figure out. Quick interruption here for anyone that's crying at their screen at the moment. That big truck that you just saw that was a failed print, I did actually salvage something from that, so don't dismay too much. Look, it's become a really cool piece of terrain. You might have seen this in the thumbnail as well, but I just thought I'd interrupt so that people were aware that I didn't just chuck away, half a pound of resin. The big one is probably space constraints. 3D printing is definitely not going to be for everyone, while it needs as much space dedicated to it as it currently does. I've got a coffee table just here beside my desk, and it's probably about 1.2 meters wide, would be about my guess. And it's full. Between my cleaning station, the printer itself, spare rolls of kitchen roll, little bits and bobs that I just want to keep by the printer, it's pretty much full. There is currently a ledge on the end, but that's going to be taken up by my curing station once I put it there. So it's not the most space economic, is that the expression? It's not the most space economic thing in the world. So something you're going to really want to be aware of getting into this is that your main investment of time, I guess, isn't going to be on researching things. A lot of that's just a quick Google. A pretty straight answer will usually be readily available, and most of these things don't really have much variance to them. If you're using X machine and Y resin, you'll be able to find someone else that's using X machine and Y resin, and therefore you'll be able to get some recommended settings and stuff like that. The thing that's going to really consume your time is hunting for miniatures. Between probably 5 or 6 different websites now, I can spend hours just browsing for potential things to print, and I have a whole new file of shame, I think my friend Renfield called it. Similar to a pile of shame, but instead of stuff that you'll never get round to painting, it's a file on my computer of stuff that I'll probably never get round to printing. The other thing that you really need to be aware of is that a lot of the good quality, commercial quality, stuff that you would buy if it was a released miniature, still costs money to buy the 3D files for. Places like Colts 3D and My Mini Factory are an absolute goldmine for incredible miniatures. There's so much really, really great stuff that you can find on them, as well as some amazing Patreons like Titan Forge and Cyberforge, which were the first two that I personally signed up to. You're not going to be starved for really good commercial quality miniatures, but they're not going to be free. A lot of the stuff that you find on places like Thingiverse, for example, is going to be stuff that people have knocked up quickly in their spare time just to kind of do the job. It's not going to be, for the most part, really nice, fine commercial quality stuff. That's not to say that those things don't exist and that you can't get them for free. They absolutely do, but you're going to spend a lot more time hunting if your budget is zero to spend on those 3D print files in order to find stuff that you really like and that is of a really decent quality. If you want to start using your 3D printer to be able to print amazing quality things, you're going to have to be willing to invest some money in those 3D files as well. Okay, so let's start talking about some of the fun aspects of owning this equipment. What can it actually do? Well, one of the perhaps less obvious but actually most useful things that I've found that my printer can do is print me really nice sculpted bases. I'm not someone who typically is known for spending a ton of time on basing, and it's definitely a thing that I've been trying to improve, trying to get better at. However, being able to print off just a really beautifully sculpted, moulded base that I can just put any old miniature on is an absolute boon for me. And the build plates are generally big enough that if you're printing, say, 32mm bases for an army, you're probably going to get somewhere in the region of 12 bases on a single print run. And because they're not very deep and not very big, it's probably only going to take an hour or so to run those off. With this in mind, if you set up a bit of batch processing and didn't mind kind of babysitting your machine for a few hours, maybe while you was working, have it beside you in the background or something, you could probably print an army's worth of 32mm bases within a single day, no problem. Another super cool thing, and this one's definitely a bit more obvious, is conversion bits. Thanks to finding a cool 3D file here, I was able to add these plasma arms to my inceptors, so my easy build bolt inceptors could become the more meta appropriate plasma inceptors without needing to go out and buy an entire new box of plasma inceptors. Now, I will say I'm not a big fan of just straight up ripping off existing IPs. I don't think that that's cool, but I think conversion bits are kind of a thing where 3D printing can really shine in areas that companies can't really cater to their markets. And so I don't feel too bad about this one, but I would definitely draw the line at printing entire armies of Warhammer miniatures, especially when a lot of the sculpts that you'll find out there will actually use things that are really identifiable parts of their IP, such as Aquilas. If you're a dungeon master, or if you play D&D and, want something to represent your own hero, a 3D printer is a great source for those just kind of simpler, more disposable D&D type miniatures. I was a huge fan for the longest time of Reaper miniatures for this exact purpose, because, for about £3, you could get a cheap, simple miniature that, did the job of representing your character or an orc or a skeleton or whatever. And with a 3D printer, you can do the same thing, but if you can find the files for cheap or free, and in the case of something like, say, Titanforge, the price per miniature is virtually zero. In terms of resin cost to just print a single 28mm miniature and its base, it's about 20p, and you can't get a miniature that cheap any other way. And the quality is actually pretty decent. Something very cool that 3D printing makes a lot more accessible are 3D busts. A bunch of people sculpt these things, they sculpt them for all sorts of projects, and since 3D printers became more common to use at home, a lot of those people are now turning them into 3D printable files. This Jon Snow bust by Eastman that I found was completely free and is beautiful. I actually sat and painted this on stream because it's such a nice piece of sculpting that I just wanted to share the process. It really excited me. And then you can totally go all the way up to like highly detailed miniatures too. There are some incredible things out there that really do look like they are from actual commercial mini companies, because they are. And that's kind of one of the things, is that home 3D printing has become another way to consume this hobby now, which means that some companies are actually basing their business models around that. And I feel like as we go forward, more companies will probably continue to do so. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we start to see either print at home alternatives to some of the popular miniatures that we're already used to buying, or specific things from those companies that are geared towards print at home. Somewhat predictably, considering that they do tend to be a little bit old-fashioned, I wouldn't be surprised if Games Workshop are one of the last to adopt this kind of strategy, or if they indeed never adopt this kind of strategy. But I am hopeful that there will be some kind of future in which GW also take this on, because I think they can still make a really reasonable pound of flesh whilst allowing people to print their materials at home. We'll see how that develops. Okay, so what are my general thoughts and feelings about this technology now that I own it, now that I actually have a bit more of an inside view of it? Well, first of all, I think I want to start with the negatives. It doesn't just shit minis. Between needing to learn your resin settings and your printer settings, between needing to actually spend time hunting for really good minis and paying money for them, between needing to understand the cleanup process and make sure that you do a good job of that. The fact that the resin itself is very sticky, it's very messy, it's very easy for it to get everywhere, and unless you buy the water washable stuff, you need to use isopropyl alcohol, which is very smelly and very flammable, in order to clean it and wash it away from things. There's also just the fact that there's a lot of additional equipment that you need, not just a printer. So budgeting can be a bit difficult if you don't do your research first. You're going to need a vat for washing in. You're going to need something to work for curing. You're going to need lots of paper towels. Admittedly, a lot of the tooling that you need tends to come with printers these days. In fact, as I'm sat here making this video, it occurs to me, the clippers that I'm now using every day, these are the sprue clippers that I've been using for the last week or so on everything, were actually free with my 3D printer, which is pretty cool. However, that said, once you account for all of those things, adjust for all of those things, it does just shit amazing minis. You can leave it running overnight and then you get to come into the room where it is to a fresh miniature every day. It's kind of like a nerdy advent calendar that just never actually stops. The range of different applications, from just simple kit bashing and third-party bits all the way through to printing entire armies, which I do believe there will be games at some point where entire armies are printed. I do think that that's the direction this technology is going in. I'm just not sure how long it's going to take to get there. But the range of stuff that it can do is huge, and that could be, depending on your usage case, absolutely game-changing to your miniature painting hobby. Cost reduction is also an important thing to talk about. Resin is not the cheapest thing in the world. A litre of resin is going to cost you about 30 quid in the UK, about $30 in the US. And so at that price of £30 a litre, you do still need to consider how much you're using on the stuff. The big half-track print that I did that failed, for example, which was my first attempt at printing something big, that cost me about 5 quid's worth of resin. So there's, depending on your personal economy, your personal spending habits and limits, that could be a problem. And you're going to have to think about that economy. For me, though, as a Warhammer player and as a content creator, it's already saving me an absolute fortune. And I think the biggest one for me, honestly, is inspiration. Having access to a 3D printer, being able to just shop an online catalogue, download a file, put it in, and get a miniature out of the other end of it is kind of huge, because there's always something that I want to paint now. If I don't want to paint something from one of my Warhammer armies, but I'm in the mood for, say, a bust, I can just go and look for a bust. I can find one and I can paint one. So I'm never having these days now where I don't have anything I want to paint. And that's pretty huge for some of us. We all suffer from the hobby slump, and having a tool that is so effective at being able to counteract the hobby slump, that to me might be the biggest thing. So folks, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know we didn't spend a lot of time talking about the actual sort of technical side of setting up for printing and stuff like that, the kind of things that you do in software and slicing and all that sort of thing. And that's because those are the kind of things that I see a lot of videos on YouTube going over. And I didn't think that there was really much that I could teach that you wouldn't be able to learn in a much better way elsewhere. So I really just wanted to share my thoughts and feelings, but I also would really like to hear your thoughts and feelings. Do you have a printer? If so, what's your take on the situation? Especially, what do you project the future to be going forward? If you're considering getting a printer, has this video helped you at all in maybe getting off of the fence and making a decision either way? No matter what, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Of course, if you like the video, you can hit that thumbs up button to let me know that you liked it. You can subscribe, you can enable notifications. Those are all great things that you can do to make it easier for us to engage with each other. If you really love the content and you want to support its creation, there is also a Patreon campaign. There's a link to that in the description, as well as all my socials if you want to get me there. So folks, I'm going to get out of here for now, but thank you so much for watching this video. I'm excited to go on this 3D printing journey, but until I get a little bit further down that road, I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.